You know how everyone says they'll remember exactly where they were when the world ends? Yeah, that's bullsh asterisk T. Because when it actually happened, most of us were too busy dying to take mental notes. But for the few of us who made it past that first hour, the survivors, the unlucky, the stubborn, oh, we remember. We remember every second, every damn breath, every scream, every flash of light that wasn't supposed to be there. We remember the sky cracking open. It started like this: a Tuesday morning, blue skies over the Pacific, lazy clouds, the usual hum of suborbital flights overhead, people sipping coffee, checking messages, griping about late trains and broken vending machines. Just another day on Earth. Then the sun blinked, just blinked, like a glitch in the sky. 1 second it was shining down on downtown Tokyo, and the next, shadows stretched sideways. Phones lost signal. Satellites stopped responding. Birds stopped mid-flight and scattered like they'd seen death coming. And then the screaming started. From orbit, our defense satellites. Millions of dollars and decades of treaties stacked into those floating chunks of metal should have given us warning. They should have at least seen it coming. They didn't. Because by the time Earth's eyes turned upward, the Seraphim were already here. Not ships, not fleets, not in any way we expected. They came like a disease, like something viral, spreading through space, devouring the laws of physics on the way in. Great living structures made of light and bone, and something worse. Something that didn't belong in our universe. Some people saw angels, others saw nightmares, but all anyone really saw was fire. Sergeant Mason Virek was elbow-deep in a busted engine block at a scrapyard on the edge of New Santiago when the first tremor hit. Not a groundquake. He'd felt plenty of those. No, this was different. Like the air had been punched. Like gravity forgot what it was supposed to do for half a second. He looked up. Sky was still blue. Then came the thunder. Not from above, from within. From the bones of the earth itself. The comms in his ear crackled to life. Static. Then a panicked voice from DefenseNet. Repeat. Code black. Global lockdown. This is not a drill. They're inside the ring. Oh God. The rest was just screaming. Mason didn't wait. He ripped the headset off, grabbed the nearest combat pack, didn't matter whose it was, and sprinted for the truck. The scrapyard sirens were already howling. Red lights, emergency warnings, fires popping up on the horizon. Then the sky ripped open. Not a metaphor, not a poetic flourish. It ripped, like someone sliced open the atmosphere with a goddamn scalpel. Clouds didn't drift apart, they evaporated. Daylight turned silver, then black, and through that gaping wound came them. Seraphim. They didn't move like ships, didn't burn like meteors. They just descended, silent, elegant, terrifying. Towers of flesh and glass and metal, twisting midair like they were swimming through reality. Behind them, the air-bled colors Mason didn't have names for. The wind reversed. Static buzzed through his fillings. He knew, without being told, that nothing would ever be the same again. By hour 1, 25 major cities were gone. Just gone, not bombed. Erased, turned into flat, scorched craters. Beijing, Johannesburg, Madrid, parts of New York blinked out mid-transit. Entire subway lines reduced to molten steel. People tried to fight. Missile silos launched. Orbital defense rings lit up. Drones swarmed like angry wasps. Mason watched all of it from a hillside outside the city, the engine block in his lap forgotten, smoke curling from the horizon. And none of it mattered. The Seraphim didn't react, didn't dodge, didn't fire back. Our weapons touched them and disintegrated. Some missiles exploded midair, not because they were intercepted, because space itself warped around their trajectory. Gravity bent, time stuttered. They weren't just killing us. They were rewriting reality as they came. By hour 3, the networks were down. No news, no orders, no governments, just fragments. Emergency broadcasts, people screaming, a pilot crying into his mic because his plane couldn't tell what up was anymore. And still, the sky kept bleeding. Mason didn't run, didn't panic. He didn't know how. Too many years in the field, too many dead comrades, too much blood under his boots. Instead, he loaded up, packed food, ammunition, water, batteries, pulled a shotgun from under the truck seat. No ceremony, no speech, just the cold knowledge that if Earth was going to burn, he sure as hell wasn't going to do it quietly. He drove through back roads, avoided the highways, fires everywhere, civilians running from something they couldn't describe. One woman stood in the middle of the road, arms raised to the sky, like she was praying to the things falling from it. He didn't stop, couldn't. Night fell. eventually, or something like night. The stars were gone, blotted out by the Seraphim's core structure, a kind of living storm that coiled over the earth like a parasite. Every so often it pulsed, sending lightning bolts the size of skyscrapers down into the crust. They weren't just invading, they were harvesting everything. Our oceans, our plants, even our damn bacteria, was being cataloged, extracted, and overwritten. And yet, some people still fought. As Mason crested a hill outside of what used to be Houston, he saw it. Flashes of tracer fire, smoke trails, explosions. A military outpost, one of the last, maybe a dozen people, holding a shattered line with whatever they had left. Mech stitched together with scrapyard parts. Trucks converted into mobile turrets. Kids with rifles older than their parents. Mason didn't think. He drove straight into the fire. He kicked open the truck door in the middle of the firefight and dropped 3 Seraphim drones with buckshot before they even turned. One of the soldiers, barely more than a teenager, face smeared with blood and dust, stared at him like he was a ghost. "Who the hell are you?" she yelled over the noise. He didn't answer, just handed her a magazine and kept firing. That night, under a sky that pulsed with alien light, they held the line. Just barely, but they did. And as dawn broke, red and wrong and twisted, Mason stood over the wreckage of a Seraphim drone, covered in ash and oil and dried blood. The kid from before leaned against a cratered wall, panting. "You think they can be killed?" she asked. He looked at the still smoking remains, then at the sky, then back at her. "I don't know," he said. Then he chambered another round. "But I know one thing. We sure as hell ain't dying easy." The world had changed, but Mason Virek hadn't, and neither had the species he came from. Earth was burning. And humanity? Humanity was just getting started. Some people think the world ends in a bang, but for most of us, it ends in silence, the kind that comes after screaming, after everything that made sense falls apart, after the panic dies down and all that's left is the quiet weight of smoke, ash, and ghosts. That's where Earth was now, not dead, but hollowed out, breathing smoke, choking on the echo of what it used to be. 3 days after the Seraphim arrival, our cities looked like graveyards, not just broken, but emptied. Skyscrapers half melted, cars flipped and fossilized mid-turn. Personal effects scattered like confetti from a funeral parade, phones still ringing, meals still warm on plates that had no one left to eat them. And above it all, hanging like an executioner's blade, the Seraphim mothership's massive biomechanical horrors that didn't obey gravity so much as mocked it. We hadn't heard from Command in almost 2 days, not because they weren't talking, but because there was no one left to answer. Which brings us to Mason. Sergeant Mason Virek, Earth Defense Forces, retired. A man who'd seen more wars than birthdays in the last decade. A man who had every reason to give up, and still didn't. By now, he wasn't just surviving. He was hunting. Mason had gathered a handful of survivors, some military, some civilian, all running on fumes and spite. They didn't call themselves a squad, didn't have a name, or a flag, or a base, just a rusted APC, a handful of weapons, and a shared refusal to lie down and die. That's when they met Alara. It was supposed to be a quick scavenging run. Mason and a scout named Gantz were combing through the skeletal remains of an old relay station outside the Rockies, looking for fuel cells and maybe a working radio. Then they heard the drone, Seraphim, all humming and buzz like a beehive made of blades. And then they saw her, Corporal Alara Jean, former drone pilot, mid-20s, lean, sharp, and bleeding from a nasty gash in her leg. She was huddled behind a wrecked rover, trying to hack into a dead drone with nothing but a cracked tablet and a busted power cell. Most people would have called her crazy. Mason called her useful. They dropped the drone, got her back to the APC, patched her up, and that night, around a sputtering campfire surrounded by wreckage and radiation warnings, she told them what she'd been doing. "I was part of Strike Team Echo," she said, "out of Orbital Command, before it burned. We were running recon on the Seraphim approach vectors, analyzing fleet patterns. At least, we thought that's what we were doing." She took a long breath. Her eyes were glassy, like she was trying to stare past the present. "Turns out we weren't tracking them. We were guiding them, feeding them exactly what they needed to map us out. And we didn't even know." Silence, except for the fire popping. "There was a signal," she continued. "Not theirs, ours. Someone inside Earth Defense Command was sending them real-time data, coordinates, defense layouts. civilian clusters. Every time we hit them, they were already gone, like they knew we were coming. She looked at Mason then. Somebody let them in. That changed everything. Up to now, most people figured the Seraphim just found us, like some horror movie alien species sniffing out humanity from across the stars. But if Alara was right, and Mason could see she was, this wasn't just a war. This was a setup, a betrayal, and someone at the top had sold Earth out. The next day, they pushed west, following the signal Alara had been tracing. Her tablet still worked, barely, and it was pinging something faint from the Denver ruins. But Denver wasn't a city anymore. It was a smear, a crater rimmed with burned-out satellites and what looked like the skeleton of a skyscraper twisted into a noose. That's where they found the second piece of the puzzle. Dr. Kiran Malhotra. He wasn't a soldier, wasn't even a fighter, but he was a genius. The kind that made enemies nervous and AI whisper his name like a prayer. He was half buried in a collapsed bunker, half conscious, surrounded by 6 dead security bots and a data drive clutched to his chest like it was a newborn. Mason pulled him out. Alara patched him up, and when he woke, he told them about Lazarus. It's not a weapon, Kiran said later, staring into the fire with a haunted look. Not in the traditional sense. They were camped in a dried-up lake bed. A makeshift tarp stretched over the APC. The stars overhead were barely visible, choked out by the Seraphim's hive structure threading through the upper atmosphere like veins in a sick sky. It's a code injection, Kiran explained. A virus, designed for the Seraphim's neural architecture. If we can deliver it to a central node, something big, like a mothership or a ground command nexus, it could fry their entire system. Like hitting Control-Alt-Delete on a hive mind. Mason stared at him. So what you're saying, he said slowly, is you built a kill switch. Kiran nodded. The problem is delivery. We'd need to get inside a Seraphim core structure to plant it. And not just any one. The big one. The one feeding all the others. Mason looked around at the group. 6 people. Half-trained, half-injured, running low on ammo, sleep, and time. He cracked his neck. All right, he said. Then we find one. They started calling themselves the Ghost Line. A joke, really, because officially, they didn't exist. No one was left to record them, and even if there was, the networks were gone. But rumors started spreading of a mobile unit that struck Seraphim supply veins at night, that scavenged enemy tech and turned it against them, that painted skulls on their armor and carried old-world flags into battle. They became symbols, myths, because in a world where entire cities had vanished, where the oceans were receding, and the sky was a lie, hope needed a body to wear. Mason didn't care about that. He didn't care about saving the world, didn't give a damn about being remembered. He just wanted to make the Seraphim bleed. And now, thanks to Alara and Kiran, he finally knew where to cut. The final scene of that week unfolded in a ravaged canyon somewhere in old Nevada. A Seraphim harvester tower had gone dark. Maybe it was damaged. Maybe it was abandoned. Or maybe, just maybe, someone was inside. They approached at night, boots silent, guns ready, tension high. The tower looked like a cathedral built by something that hated symmetry. Organic metal, pulsing light, no doors, just an opening that breathed. Mason led the way in, and what they found inside, it wasn't weapons. It wasn't supplies. It was a message, a Seraphim data core, plugged into a transmitter, and playing a signal on loop. In English, a human voice. Male, calm, cold. This is General Anton Rourke. If you're hearing this, you're too late. They are evolution. You are Ash. I did what I had to. For the species, we can still survive, but not as we are. Join me, or be forgotten. The traitor had a name now, a face, a location confirmed by the signal's signature, Anchorage, Alaska. He hadn't just helped them get in. He'd invited them, welcomed them. Mason didn't say anything for a long time after that. He just stared at the data core like it was an open wound. Then he looked at Alara, then at Kiran, then at the rest of the squad. And finally, he spoke. Just 5 words. Quiet, heavy. Get me to Anchorage. Now. There are betrayals that leave bruises. And then there are the ones that leave craters. The kind that take your home, your people, your very planet, and set them on fire from the inside out. That's what Mason Virek felt, staring at the glowing Seraphim data core. Not anger, not at first, just disbelief. Like hearing the devil had been living in your attic the whole time, sipping your coffee, reading your news, pretending to be one of you. General Anton Rourke, Alara whispered, the last supreme commander of Earth defense. Mason didn't respond, because deep down, a piece of him had already known. Rourke wasn't just a soldier. He was the soldier. Decorated, cold-blooded, efficient as hell. The kind of man whose name echoed in military briefings like a war drum. The kind who always made the hard calls. When the aliens hit, he'd been at the top. And then, just like that, gone. No death, no distress signal, no hero's sacrifice. Just vanished. Some had figured he died fighting. Others, that he'd been taken. Nobody expected this. That the man sworn to protect Earth had opened the door and bowed. Kieran ran the audio a dozen times. Each word cut a little deeper. Their evolution. Rourke's voice said again. You are Ash. I did what I had to. For the species. He sounded calm. Too calm. Like he truly believed it. That's what made it worse. This wasn't desperation. It was conviction. Why? Alara asked, pacing in the dark. Why would he side with them? What kind of man turns on his entire planet? Kieran spoke softly. Not because he was afraid, but because the truth was heavy. Because he thought we were going to lose. And maybe, just maybe, he wasn't wrong. They set a course north. Anchorage, the last known location of the signal's origin. High-value intel said Rourke had built something up there. A fusion of Seraphim biotech and Earth's military infrastructure. A tower. Maybe. A hub. No one knew for sure. Didn't matter. Mason had already made up his mind. We find him, he said. We cut the snake's head clean off. The journey north wasn't easy. The roads were bones now. Cracked, twisted, littered with burned-out convoys and ash-dusted husks of towns that once had names. The world had gone quiet, but not safe. Seraphim harvesters still roamed in search patterns. Walking nightmares that didn't need pilots. Powered by instincts more ancient than logic. The sky never truly darkened, not with their hive structures pulsing overhead like dying stars. The team avoided them when they could, but sometimes there wasn't a choice. 2 days in, they hit a Seraphim patrol outside the ruins of Whitehorse. It was fast, ugly. Alara spotted the shimmer in the treetops, too symmetrical to be natural. Drone cloaks. She screamed a warning just as the trees exploded. 3 of the drones dropped straight from the sky, silent, fast, twitching like spiders that had studied anatomy but didn't like it. Mason was already moving. No shouting, no fear, just action. His shotgun bucked once, blew the first drone in half midair. Kieran dropped behind cover, jabbing a spike into the comms relay. He triggered a jamming field from the APC's underside. Static blared. The second drone seized up in midair and slammed into the dirt. The third one reached Alara. Too close, too fast. She ducked under its blade, but not fast enough. The thing clipped her shoulder, sent her spinning. Blood hit the snow. She rolled, came up, screamed, and emptied a full mag into its face. It twitched, then fell. Silence. Just the hum of dying metal. Alara groaned, dragging herself against a tree. Mason helped her up. You good? She gritted her teeth. Dislocated, but yeah, still pretty. He smirked. Liar. After that, there were no more jokes. Only planning. They camped under a collapsed rail line. The wind howled like wolves with no mouths. Alara worked through the pain, recalibrating their scanners to track Seraphim frequencies. Kieran patched into the relay core, mapping the spikes in Rourke's transmission. He was moving, but the signal structure hinted at a fixed location. He's not running, Kieran muttered, more to himself than anyone else. He wants us to come. Alara scoffed. Big mistake. But Mason said nothing, because deep in his gut, he knew. Rourke wasn't bluffing. He believed everything he was doing. That made him dangerous. They reached the edge of Anchorage on day 4, or what was left of it. The city had been reshaped, sculpted into something obscene. Seraphim towers twisted upward from the ground like spinal cords. Buildings had merged with alien alloy, glass veins pulsing under rusted steel. Roads were warped, stretching upward into spires. Gravity flickered. Sound echoed wrong. The place felt alive. And at its center, the tower. Rourke's tower. It wasn't tall, not like the others, but it was dense, heavy, like it had been grown from regret and war crimes. There were no guards, no drones, no warnings, just a single ramp leading downward into the earth. They entered, and the silence swallowed them whole. The inside of the tower was colder than it had any right to be. The walls glowed dimly, pale blue, breathing like lungs. Human tech fused with Seraphim design. Consoles grown from bone. Lights that blinked in rhythm with heartbeats. At the center was a chamber, and in that chamber stood Rourke, alive, unchanged, and yet completely inhuman. He turned slowly, not startled, not armed, just calm. Virek, he said. I figured it'd be you. Mason stepped forward, weapon raised. Rourke didn't even blink. "You betrayed Earth," Mason growled. "No," Rourke said. "I saved it." The speech was coming. Of course it was. Every traitor has one. But what made this one sting was that part of it almost made sense. Of the Seraphim's arrival not as a surprise, but a mathematical certainty. He spoke of the silent war behind the war, the decades of classified files, of dead stars and vanished colonies and deep space probes that never came back. "We were never alone," he said, "and we were never the top of the food chain." So he did what he thought necessary. He made a deal, a surrender, in exchange for survival. Not for himself, for humanity, but not as it was. As it would be, reshaped, evolved, improved, assimilated. Mason didn't move, didn't speak, because the only thing more dangerous than a liar is a believer. And Rourke believed. "They'll spare us," he said. "A curated version of us. Efficient, clean, immortal." "That's not survival," Mason said. "That's erasure. It's mercy. It's not yours to give." Rourke nodded, sadly. "Then I guess this is where you kill me." He turned, unarmed. Mason raised the rifle, paused, because maybe, just for a second, he wondered if Rourke was right. Maybe this was inevitable. Maybe fighting it was just prolonging the pain. But then he looked at Alara, at Kieran, at the scars, the dirt, the blood, the humanity still clinging to every inch of them. And he knew, even if they lost, even if they burned, they would burn free. The shot echoed through the tower. Rourke fell. Not a word, not a scream, just a thud. And then, everything changed. The tower screamed, not literally, but through the walls, the light, the air. Something had been triggered, something deep. Kieran scrambled to the console. "It's a failsafe, a broadcast relay." Rourke was sending a ping to the Seraphim Prime. "Coordinates, data, final override. Can you shut it down?" "No," Kieran said, "but I can hijack it." He pulled out the Lazarus spike drive, plugged it in. The tower convulsed. System shorted. Lights stuttered. And then, silence. The broadcast was ours now. For the first time in weeks, Earth fought back. Seraphim drones hesitated. Towers flickered. Command signals went dark. It was like unplugging the enemy's brain for a heartbeat. But a heartbeat was all Mason needed, because now they knew where to hit. And more importantly, they knew it worked. They left Anchorage with more than just a dead traitor. They left with a plan, a direction, and a reason to believe this wasn't over yet. Because humanity, we're not built for surrender. We're built for war. And this was only the beginning. Sometimes, when a man dies, the world gets quieter. But when a man like Anton Rourke dies, the world starts screaming. His death wasn't just personal. It was a declaration. And the Seraphim heard it loud and clear. It started with a pulse. One of those low, bone-deep vibrations that rattled your teeth and made the air feel too heavy in your lungs. The kind of noise that didn't come from anything natural. Then came the light. Pillars of it, stabbing down from the clouds like God was taking potshots at the planet. Anchorage lit up like a matchbook. Rourke's signal had gone dark, but his backup plan hadn't. He'd been feeding data to the Seraphim for weeks, maybe months. And now that the source was compromised, they came to clean up the mess. Fast, brutal, without mercy. The team barely made it out of the tower before the first wave hit. Drones, twice as fast now. Four-limbed nightmares with serrated wings and fusion claws, descending in a tight spiral formation like vultures that evolved on something meaner than meat. Alara dropped the first two with precise blasts from her pulse rifle. Mason took down another with a shotgun, but they just kept coming. Kieran sprinted toward the APC, carrying the Lazarus spike clutched to his chest like a heart transplant. Bullets and plasma hissed through the air. Rex, the old war dog, cybernetic and patched with more armor than fur, tore into a drone that got too close. It shrieked, metallic and wrong, as Rex ripped its leg off and tossed it like a chew toy. But it was clear, they weren't trying to kill the team. They were trying to destroy the spike. "We've got to move," Alara shouted, ducking behind cover as another bolt melted the concrete near her head. Mason slammed the back of the APC open, yelling to Kieran, "Can it broadcast from the field?" "No. It needs amplification. We need the old comms array. Half a mile northeast on the ridge." Of course it was, because nothing was ever easy. They mounted up, tearing across the ruins of Anchorage as the Seraphim rained hell down behind them. The city looked like a wound. Buildings hunched and cracked, roads glowing from kinetic blasts, air thick with smoke and static, every breath tasting like battery acid. The Seraphim weren't just killing, they were rewriting. Structures shifting in real time, bricks melting into bone, metal bending into alien curves, reality warping like it was clay under invisible hands. Kieran called it terraforming. Alara called it violation. Mason just called it war. The comms array sat on the bones of what used to be a weather station. Old school tech. Tower was crooked but still standing. Solar grid offline. Antennas bent like wire sculptures made by someone halfway through a nervous breakdown. And guarding it? A seraphim juggernaut. Not a drone. Not a walker. Something worse. It stood 3 stories high, body flickering between armor and light, like it hadn't decided if it wanted to exist in this dimension or the next. Multiple limbs, each tipped with something sharp and ugly. And at its center, a pulsing core. Blood red. Alive. Well, Mason muttered. That's new. We can't take that head on, Alara said, crouching beside the APC, trying to get a clear angle. We don't have to, Kieran replied, pulling a device from his pack. I can remote jump the Lazarus spike through the array if I can get 30 uninterrupted seconds of signal lock. Mason raised an eyebrow. You really think that thing's gonna give you 30 seconds? Kieran grinned. It wasn't a happy grin. No. That's where you come in. And so they did what humans always do when everything's falling apart around them. They ran toward the fire. Mason charged first, laying down suppressive fire as Rex flanked wide. Alara went high, climbing up the shell of a collapsed truck and drawing the Juggernaut's attention with a precision sniper round to its upper limb. The thing roared, if you could call it that. It sounded like a dying choir and a thunderstorm playing backwards. It turned, too fast for something that big, and swung. Concrete exploded where Mason had just been. Rex lunged, biting into a joint that sparked and hissed. The Juggernaut swatted him away like a toy, but it stumbled. That was enough. Alara landed another shot to its core. Sparks flew. Its form shuddered. Kieran, now. Mason yelled. Kieran was already moving. He sprinted across the open ground, climbed the tower like a man with no fear, or maybe just no time left to feel it, and jammed the spike into the main relay. The tower lit up. A soft, rising hum filled the air, climbing in pitch like a choir of ghosts whispering in binary. The Juggernaut went still for just a moment. Then it screamed, not out loud everywhere, through the air, through the ground, through every nervous system within range. Mason dropped to one knee, ears bleeding. Alara gasped. Rex held. Kieran stayed standing, eyes glowing faintly from the spike's feedback. It's working, he said, his voice low. We're in their system. He opened a channel, and what came through? It wasn't words. It was images, flashes, memories, thousands, millions of human moments. Soldiers holding the line, parents shielding children, a farmer standing between his home and a drone with nothing but a shovel, a dying pilot crashing her shuttle into a harvester because she refused to give them her sky. The spike wasn't just a virus. It was a mirror, and it was showing the Seraphim everything they never understood about us. The Juggernaut's form flickered. It twisted, glitched, spasmed. Mason saw its core stutter. He saw an opening. Now, Alara didn't hesitate. One round, straight through the heart. The Juggernaut exploded, not outward, inward, collapsed in on itself, folding like paper burning in reverse. Gone in an instant. Silence fell again. This time, it felt earned. The relay stabilized. The spike was broadcasting, full strength, across every remaining defense node, every abandoned station, every AI satellite still drifting in orbit. And the Seraphim felt it. You could see it in the sky. Their hive structures faltered. Their formations shifted. Globes of light dimmed, some collapsing entirely. It wasn't a victory, not yet, but it was a scar, a mark that said, we are still here. Back at the camp, hours later, they sat in the dark, not because they had to, but because it felt right. The fire cracked. Alara was nursing a broken rib. Rex had a fresh metal limb. Kieran's hands wouldn't stop shaking from the neural feedback. Mason sat apart, watching the stars. For the first time in days, he could actually see them. Not all, but enough. Alara joined him eventually. She didn't say anything for a while. Then, we made a dent. He nodded. We need to make a crater. She smirked. Big plans? Big enough to piss off God. Because now they knew something the Seraphim never saw coming. That humanity's strength wasn't in weapons or numbers. It was in spite. In the middle finger we give to the impossible. In the way we plant our feet in the dirt, look extinction in the eye, and say, not today. And somewhere, out there, in the dark, the Seraphim Prime was watching, waiting, and for the first time, maybe it was worried. You'd think after surviving a living sky, after killing a Seraphim juggernaut and hijacking an alien transmission tower, things would get easier. Spoiler, they didn't. Turns out, When you punch a god in the mouth, the god punches back. Hard. After Anchorage, the Seraphim changed tactics. No more slow-motion terraforming. No more elegant, sweeping conquest. Now it was annihilation. Scorched earth, flash flood plasma storms. Entire biomes turned to glass. They weren't just trying to win anymore. They were trying to erase. But that's the thing about humans. The more you try to wipe us out, the harder we dig in. Mason's squad, the Ghost Line, as Whispers now called them, was down to 6. 7 if you counted Rex, which you should, because he had more kills than half the group combined. They'd broadcasted the Lazarus spike from Anchorage, a virus built from hope and desperation, punched into the Seraphim's neural web like a nail into an open eye. And it hurt them. Not fatally. Not yet. But enough to make them bleed. Enough to show they could. And that was all the fuel the Ghost Line needed. The plan now? Simple. Find the core. Not the Seraphim fleet. Not their harvesters. Not the towering juggernauts reshaping cities. No. They wanted the prime. The first one. The mind behind the hive. The source. The thing that had whispered to Rourke, promising a future without pain. And if that meant walking through hell, so be it. Alara found the lead. A deep-range military satellite, one of the last still functional, picked up something strange in the Arctic. A heat bloom, massive, irregular, buried beneath the ice, where nothing should have been moving, let alone glowing. It's not geothermal, she said, scrolling through the grainy data feed. It's alive. Mason stared at the map. A spiral-shaped structure beneath the ice shelf. Not natural. Not human. Seraphim, you think that's where it is? Kieran asked. Mason didn't blink. It's where we end this. They took what they could carry. No reinforcements. No backup. No air cover. Just a cold wind. A stolen Seraphim skiff they'd learned to pilot by sheer guesswork, and a belief so stubborn it probably counted as religion by now. They called it the dive. The flight north was quiet. Too quiet. Like the sky was holding its breath. Clouds thinned. Stars reappeared. And beneath them, the Arctic, fractured and jagged, split open like an old scar no one ever stitched shut. And at the center, the spiral. It wasn't a base. It wasn't even a structure. Not in the way humans understand buildings. It was grown, a living knot of tendrils, cables, and membrane sprawling outward like a black rose blooming under the ice. Its pulse echoed through the wind. Slow, rhythmic, like a heart. The Seraphim Prime wasn't inside it. The spiral was the Seraphim Prime. They touched down on a ledge barely wide enough for the skiff's landing gear. Everything creaked. Wind howled like it was warning them to turn back. But they didn't. They never did. Mason led. Of course he did. Alara followed, rifle up, eyes scanning for threats in the dark that didn't need light to see. Kieran held the core spike, now heavily modified. The Lazarus 2.0. It was their bullet. The last one. Rex padded silently at Mason's side, scarred but alert, loyal to the last heartbeat. They moved deeper into the spiral, and that's when the hallucinations started. It didn't hit all at once, just flickers. A voice here, a face there. Mason saw his old squad, his brothers in arms, the ones buried under Martian soil and bureaucratic lies. They were laughing, eating rations, talking like they were still alive. Kieran heard music, his wife's playlist, from the night she died in the first Seraphim blast. Alara saw her father, the one who'd gone missing in the first contact years, the one they'd told her was dead. He smiled at her, reached out, said her name. Don't listen. Mason growled. It's not real, but it felt real. That was the point. The spiral wasn't just physical. It was psychological. It attacked where you were weakest, wormed its way into the soft parts of your soul, made you question the only thing that kept you moving, your pain. Deeper still, the air grew thick. Breathing felt like swallowing cotton soaked in blood. The walls pulsed. Veins, lights, organic machinery that whispered in frequencies no human throat could replicate. And at the center, they found it. The core. Not a being. Not really. More like a presence. A structure hanging in midair, spinning impossibly, like a galaxy trapped in a snow globe. Everything about it screamed wrong. Not evil, just indifferent. Vast, cold, beyond empathy. A mind that had cataloged species like entries in a logbook and checked off humanity with a bored flick of a tendril. Mason stepped forward. The core pulsed, and then it spoke. You suffer. It didn't use words. Not exactly. More like meaning that pushed itself into your brain like a needle through silk. You were inefficient, fractured, violent. Kieran staggered under the weight of it. Alara winced. But Mason? Mason laughed. Yeah, and we're still here, aren't we? The core didn't respond, so he kept going. You burned our skies, shattered our cities, turned our friends into numbers and our families into ash. And we still spit in your eye. The walls trembled. You will not survive. Maybe, Mason said, but neither will you. He nodded to Kieran. Kieran moved, pulled the spike, jammed it into the base of the core chamber, hands trembling, teeth clenched against the weight of 1,000 thoughts that weren't his. The spiral screamed, lights flared, and suddenly, everything hit back. Defense systems activated. Not drones, not bots. The spiral itself began to reshape. Walls became claws. Floors became mouths. The very structure of the prime twisted inward to devour them. But humanity? Humanity knows how to run through hell. Alara laid down cover fire. Plasma bursts tearing through walls that bled light. Rex pounced on a tendril that got too close. Kieran triggered the spike's final lock-in sequence as the core began to break apart. Mason dragged them out. One by one, the corridor collapsed behind them. The wind roared. And then, the spike detonated. Not an explosion. A shutdown. The spiral seized, froze, then folded in on itself like a collapsing lung. Silence. They didn't speak for a long time. The skiff lifted off. Above them, the seraphim hive structures began to flicker, then vanish. Gone. Like waking from a nightmare that left no shadow. They didn't win. Not really. But they ended it. And sometimes, that's enough. Back at base, what was left of it? Someone handed Mason a comm. Global channels were coming back online. Other squads reporting victories. Survivors. Pockets of resistance lighting up like stars across a black canvas. And in each report, one name kept popping up. The Ghost Line. A myth that had become a movement. Mason didn't say anything. He just looked at the sky. And for the first time since this all began, it was blue again. The war didn't end with a bang. No grand explosion. No flags waving in slow motion. No crowds erupting in joy. It ended with silence. Heavy, lingering, almost cruel. The kind of silence that doesn't celebrate victory, just marks the absence of more screaming. The seraphim were gone. Not destroyed, not completely, but disconnected, cut off from each other. Hive mind shattered, leaving fragments drifting like broken satellites. Some simply stopped moving. Others wandered aimlessly, collapsing mid-step like puppets without strings. The sky cleared. The ground steadied. The spiral in the Arctic, whatever it had truly been, imploded into a crater so deep even the stars seemed afraid to look down into it. Humanity had won, or at least survived. But the cost? The cost was everywhere. Mason stood on a ridge overlooking the remains of Anchorage, or what was left of it. Buildings leaned like drunks. Roads split open. Ash still floated in the air, clinging to skin, to clothes, to memories. Alara sat beside him, arms wrapped around her knees, watching the sky fade from orange to bruised purple. They hadn't spoken much since the spiral, not out of tension, just exhaustion. The kind that sits in your bones and doesn't leave. Think they're really gone? She asked quietly. Mason didn't answer right away. He just stared out at the wreckage, eyes scanning for movement that wasn't coming. Then, no. But they're not here, and that's enough for now. Down below, the world was waking up. What remained of it? Anyway, survivors were coming out of bunkers, out of caves, out of whatever holes they'd hidden in while the sky burned. Some were still armed. Some carried children on their backs. All of them carried scars. There were cities with no names anymore, countries without borders. But somehow, against logic and probability in every stacked deck imaginable, humans were still standing. And that was something. The Ghost Line had become more than a story now. It was a signal, a rallying point. What started as 6 stubborn survivors and a cybernetic war dog had grown into something bigger. Teams started forming around the world, picking up pieces, clearing zones, rebuilding, and everywhere they went, the name followed them. Sometimes whispered, sometimes shouted, but always with a kind of reverence. Because they didn't just fight back, they proved it was possible. Kieran spent most of his days in the relay station outside Anchorage, buried in what was left of the Seraphim's neural debris. The man hadn't slept properly in days, but he didn't seem to care. His hands were covered in cuts from salvaged cables, eyes bloodshot from staring at code most people couldn't even comprehend. But he was smiling, because for the first time in years, he wasn't reacting. He was creating. We can learn from them, he told Mason one night, voice hoarse. Not everything, not the assimilation crap, but their infrastructure, their power systems, their biotech. Hell, half of it we barely scratched the surface. Mason leaned against the doorway, arms crossed. You think that's a good idea? Digging through alien bones. Kieran grinned, the tired kind that knew the risk and chased it anyway. I think it's the only idea. They tried to turn us into something we're not. Maybe it's time we turn their tools into something they never expected. What's that? Kieran didn't hesitate. Hope. Elsewhere, people were beginning to write things down again. Stories, reports, journals. Not just to make sense of what happened, but to remember. Because history, as fragile and biased as it could be, was still the best weapon against forgetting. And forgetting was how monsters grew. But it wasn't all rebuilding and reflection. There were still Seraphim pockets. Drones that didn't shut down when the core collapsed. Units that had developed their own behavior. Rogue, unpredictable, hungry. The ghost line hunted them like ghosts of their own. Fast raids, precision strikes. They weren't trying to win anymore. They were making sure the war didn't restart. Alara took point most days. She moved quieter now, smiled less. Her left arm was covered in a fresh lattice of synthetic veins, Seraphim tech fused to human nerve. Not by choice. Not exactly. It saved my life, she said once, flexing the hand. But it doesn't feel like mine. Mason understood. They were all different now. Not just physically. Something inside them had cracked during the war and healed wrong. Not weaker. Not broken. Just changed. They called themselves the Broken Ones. Half joking, half truth. Soldiers who'd seen too much. Civilians who'd done too much. People who didn't know where to go after a war that didn't leave a map. They drifted to each other like satellites looking for orbit. Built outposts from ruins. Started new names, new flags, new rules. Not because they had to, because they could. There was a boy in New York, maybe 14, who set up a solar-powered radio station in the husk of an old museum. He played jazz, told jokes, read old poems out loud. Sometimes he'd broadcast survivor requests like, if anyone's got extra medicine in Sector 12, there's a sick kid who needs help. Or, still no sign of my sister. Her name's June. If you're out there, I'm not giving up. People listened, not because they needed the updates, because they needed the sound, a voice in the dark, proof that someone else was still out there. Mason visited once, didn't tell anyone who he was, just sat by the transmitter with the kid, sipping stale coffee and listening to Miles Davis echo through the bones of the old world. And for the first time in a long time, he let himself feel it. The weight, the loss, the pride, all wrapped up in that music. It wasn't a funeral. It was a promise. Some people asked if the Seraphim would come back. Of course they would. Not today. Maybe not for years. But nothing like that ever really ends. There's always another signal, another hunger, another machine that thinks it knows better. But next time, we'll be ready. Not because we built bigger guns, but because we remembered what we're made of. Not perfection, not unity, but defiance. Mason stood once more at the edge of the ice shelf, looking out over the crater where the spiral used to be. No light, no pulse, just silence. But this time, it didn't feel empty. It felt earned. Rex sat beside him, mechanical tail thumping quietly. Mason knelt, scratched behind the dog's ear, and looked to the horizon. They'll come again, he said. Rex let out a low rumble. Mason nodded. Good. Let him. War doesn't end when the guns go silent. Not really. The echoes just get quieter. The wounds get deeper. And the people left behind, they change. Sometimes they heal. Sometimes they don't. And sometimes they turn into something new. It had been 6 weeks since the spiral collapsed. 6 weeks since the Seraphim vanished, and Earth took its first real breath in years. But breathing didn't mean living. Not yet. Not when the air still smelled like ash. Out in the wastes, somewhere between the ruins of old Edmonton and the crater plains of Alberta, a new outpost was rising. Steel grafted onto concrete. Wood salvaged from churches, schools, homes. Solar panels from dead satellites. And painted across the outer wall in faded red. Ghost Line Sector 7. The name had become more than a call sign. It was a rally cry, a myth, a tattoo people carved into armor or scrawled across helmets with whatever chalk or blood they had left. Because when everything else was dust, myths gave people something to stand behind. Mason had stopped sleeping, not in the way most people say they can't sleep, not tossing and turning. He just didn't try anymore. Rest was something that belonged to a world before. Now, every time he closed his eyes, he saw the spiral, the core, the way it had looked at him without eyes, the way it had spoken without sound, like it had understood everything about him in an instant and judged him insufficient. He'd killed it anyway, and part of him still wondered what that made him. Sector 7 had become the unofficial command post for Northern resistance, not because Mason wanted it to be, because someone had to step up. And in a world full of broken pieces, people gravitated toward the ones that still looked like they had a shape. Mason wasn't a leader, but he was steady, and in a landscape of grief and chaos, steady was enough. Alara ran drills in the courtyard every morning. 6 a.m., snow or firestorm, didn't matter. Anyone who could hold a weapon showed up. Kids barely 16. Veterans with cybernetics bolted to the bone. Farmers who'd turned their plows into spears. They all trained like tomorrow depended on it. Because maybe it did. Alara didn't believe in false hope. She didn't give speeches, didn't sugarcoat the numbers. She'd just say, the monsters aren't gone. They're just waiting for the lights to go out again. And then she'd teach them how to shoot between the eyes. Kieran, he hadn't left the underground lab in days. The Lazarus core had survived the spiral. Barely, but what was left of it? Well, it was talking, not with words, but pulses, energy signatures, shifting code that looked like poetry written by a dying god. Kieran was obsessed. They're still out there, he said to Mason once, voice low, eyes sunken. We only severed the limb. The brain, it's searching, bleeding, adapting. Mason just stared at him. So what are you trying to do? Talk to it. No, I'm trying to beat it. He was building something new, a hybrid construct, Seraphim tech meshed with human hardware, a kind of defensive architecture that could think faster than any strategist, respond faster than any radar. He called it Project Virek. Mason didn't like the name, but he didn't argue, because they were past arguing. Now it was all about preparation. Sector 7 wasn't just a base. It was becoming a city, a rough one, sure, loud, smelled like oil and sweat and melted snow, but it felt alive. Vendors opened food carts using salvage grills. Kids turned old junkyards into playgrounds. An old woman built a makeshift chapel out of helicopter wreckage and painted the ceiling with stars. Not religious stars, real ones, from memory. Because even when the sky was full of fire, people still remembered the constellations. And then, one day, the screams returned. Not from the sky, from the forest. The alarms hit just before midnight. 3 sharp tones, a low rumble, then a flicker in the tower lights. Mason was already up, grabbed his rifle, slid into armor. Rex was already waiting at the door, growling low. By the time Mason reached the perimeter, Alara was there. Eyes narrowed, blood streaking one cheek. Scout team never checked in. Which one? Bravo 8. They were sweeping the ridge trail, supposed to be back an hour ago. Mason cursed under his breath. Send 2 fire teams to the extraction ridge. Quiet. Stealth mode. No lights. Already done, she said. Already moving. They found the scout team half a mile into the woods. What was left of them? Bodies torn open. Not by plasma. Not by drones. By something closer. Organic. Sharp. Teeth marks, not blades. One survivor. Barely breathing. He said one word before slipping into unconsciousness. It changed. Back at base, they put it together. A Seraphim drone had survived the shutdown. Alone. Disconnected. It hadn't gone dormant. It had evolved. It had grown flesh. Not in a clean way. Not surgical. Not perfect. Messy. Horrifying. Human bones fused with alien tech. Faces that almost looked real. Limbs that flexed like muscle but moved like wire. It had watched humans long enough to learn. And now, it was trying to become one. They called it the Mimic. For the next 2 weeks, Sector 7 went on lockdown. No lone patrols. No external salvage runs. Every shadow was suspect. Because the Mimic didn't just kill. It copied. Stole voice. Movement. Faces. It walked into 2 outposts before anyone even realized the mistake. And by the time they did, it was too late. Mason saw the aftermath. Children gone. Soldiers butchered. Structures twisted into nests of bone and cable. Like the spiral had sent a piece of itself behind. It wasn't about conquest anymore. It was about infection. About survival through imitation. Alara led the hunt. 12 squats. Thermal tracking. Bioscanners. Every time they thought they had it cornered, it was already somewhere else. It learned fast. Smarter. Meaner. More desperate. Like a rat in a maze that realized it could move the walls. Kieran finally found the answer. Deep in the Lazarus signal, buried under corruption and echo files, was a pattern, a code fragment. It didn't belong to the Seraphim, and it didn't belong to humans. It belonged to the thing in between. The Mimic was evolving past both. It was becoming a third species. They had one shot. Lure it, trap it, burn it with the full Lazarus feedback pulse. Weaponized. Mason agreed, but he insisted on being bait. The plan was simple. Find it, let it find him, lead it to the central relay tower, where the pulse was rigged, then fry it. Alara hated the plan. So did Kieran, but no one argued, because deep down, they all knew Mason wasn't planning on coming back. The trap worked. Kind of. It found him by the river, took the shape of an old friend. Someone long dead, spoke to him in his own voice, asked him why he kept fighting. He didn't answer. He just ran. The relay tower lit up like sunrise. The pulse went off, and the mimic, screaming in 5 different languages, none of them right, burned. But so did Mason. He survived, barely, half his body gone. But when he opened his eyes, days later, Alara was there, and so was Rex. And outside his window, Sector 7 was still standing. The war wasn't over. It never really would be. But for now, there was a wall around their home. There were people singing in the mess hall. There was a little girl drawing on the metal floor with chalk, sketching rockets and stars and her mother's face. And there was a man, half flesh, half steel, watching it all from a wheelchair, with eyes that had seen too much and still refused to close. This was humanity, scarred, burned, but unbroken, wrapped in ash and armor, and ready for whatever came next. Time doesn't ask for permission to pass. It just does. One sunrise, then another, then 100 more. And suddenly, war stories are just stories. The gunfire gets quieter in your memory. The scars get duller. The ghosts still visit, but only when the lights go out and everything else is still. 2 years since the spiral fell, 1 since the mimic burned, and Sector 7 was still standing, not just surviving anymore, living. The outpost had grown, not taller, not fancier, just wider, more connected, the kind of place that didn't creak under the wind anymore, the kind of place that had a name. They didn't call it Ghost Line anymore. Too heavy, too haunted. Now it was just Haven. The walls were still armed, always, and patrols still went out every week to sweep for lingering Seraphim drones or feral tech. But the kids? They didn't flinch when the alarms buzzed anymore. They ran through the corridors like it was recess, painted murals on old reactor panels, played tag on landing pads that used to smell like blood, and they asked questions, too. What was it like during the black sky? Did you really see a monster that talked like a person? Why is Mason's legs shiny? Mason didn't mind. He liked the questions, even when they hurt, because it meant the next generation cared, and that was rare. He'd recovered more than anyone expected, rebuilt from elbow to knee in synth tissue and chrome. The doctors offered him a clean, polished prosthetic frame. He refused. He wanted the damage visible, a reminder, not of pain, of price. He spent most days on the wall now, not out of duty, just habit, watching the horizon, watching for movement, not expecting it, but not forgetting. There was always the chance that the Seraphim weren't done with us yet. Inside Haven, things felt different, not peaceful, but something close. The old war maps had been replaced with crop schedules. Weapons caches were now tucked behind rows of storage crates marked school supplies. Kieran ran a tech academy now. 10 students, some barely tall enough to reach the keyboards. And yet, there they were, reverse engineering scavenged Seraphim memory cores like it was a puzzle game. Kieran had become something of a legend, the man who taught alien machines how to scream. He never denied it, but he always smiled quietly afterward. Alara trained a whole new generation of rangers, not soldiers, protectors. There was a difference. She taught them how to move quietly, how to survive in the snow, how to listen to the wind when it whispered wrong. But most of all, she taught them how to choose. Your weapon is not your answer, she'd say, walking the perimeter with 6 wide-eyed teens trailing behind. It's just your last question. Then came Ada, 12 years old, hair like wildfire, eyes like flint, born during the war, first child in Haven. She'd never seen a Seraphim, never hid in a bunker, never heard the spiral song that had turned grown men into sobbing wrecks. But you'd swear, when she looked at you, she remembered anyway. Ada asked more questions than anyone else, but she didn't ask what happened. She asked why it happened, why the Seraphim came, why they chose Earth, why humans fought back when surrender would have been easier, and no one could give her a clean answer. Mason saw himself in her, or maybe he saw the man he wished he'd been, not angry, not broken, just curious, unshakable, and full of fire. He took her out to the crater once, the spiral's grave. The snow never settled there properly, still warm underneath, still humming if you put your ear to the ground. Ada didn't flinch. She stood at the edge of that vast scar, eyes wide, arms folded, and said, "This is where they tried to change us." Yeah, Mason nodded, but they failed. She said it so simply, so sure, like it wasn't even a question worth doubting. The truth is, the children didn't fear the future, because they were the future. They weren't weighed down by the memories of what had been lost. They were building something new, piece by piece, and sometimes that meant letting go of old things. One afternoon, a fire team found a Seraphim drone in the snow. still active, barely. Its legs twitched, its optics flickered, but it wasn't attacking. It was trying to speak. No words, just garbled data, whispers. Alara wanted it destroyed. Kieran wanted to study it. But Ada? She just walked up to it. Everyone shouted, ordered her to stop. She ignored them, got close, knelt, placed her hand on the shell, and said, "You're lost, aren't you?" The drone froze, then shut down, quietly, like it was tired. They buried it in the field near the edge of Haven, not out of sympathy, out of respect. Even enemies deserve a grave, especially the ones who forgot what they were fighting for. The war left ruins across the earth, still did. Outposts with no names, bunkers full of bones and silence, cities reclaimed by moss and time. But Haven, it thrived because it wasn't built on fear. It was built on defiance. The same stubborn heartbeat that said, no, no to extinction, no to assimilation, no to giving up just because things hurt. One night, under a new moon, Mason called a meeting in the hall. He stood in front of the people of Haven, adults, elders, teens, children, and didn't bring a weapon, just a piece of paper, folded, wrinkled, an old pledge. The words weren't fancy, but they were true. He read it aloud. "We are not what they tried to make us. We are not the monsters they warned us we would become. We are what rises, what refuses, what builds again, together, always together." And for the first time in a long time, he didn't feel like a soldier. He felt like a man. They lit lanterns that night, hundreds, let them rise into the sky like fireflies chasing the stars. And for once, no one looked for incoming threats. No one clutched a rifle. They just watched the light rise, watched their breath mix with the cold air, watched their future floating higher and higher until it became part of the sky. Ada sat next to Mason, didn't say anything for a while. Then, "Do you think they'll come back?" He nodded slowly. "Probably. And when they do," he looked at her, smiled, "then they'll find out we've grown teeth." Because the children of the Fallout, they weren't scared. They were ready, born in fire, raised in defiance, and sharper than anything the stars could throw at them. You can live in peace. You can build it, breathe it, walk in it like sunshine after a storm. But no matter how strong your walls are, the sky still remembers. And one day, it calls your name again. It started like deja vu. Not fire, not screams, just a sound. A low-frequency hum, distant as thunder. Somewhere beyond Haven's radar reach. Too steady to be natural, too familiar to be harmless. They picked it up on the east towers first. A faint pulse, intermittent. Kieran called it a heartbeat with teeth. Mason called it something else, a warning. Haven didn't panic. Not this time. They'd spent 2 years learning how not to panic. Systems went online. Weapons prepped. Rangers took their positions. Alara reactivated the Overwatch grid. Ada watched, not from fear, but from curiosity. She'd grown taller, quieter too, her eyes sharper. She didn't run from the sound. She leaned into it. Kieran spent 40 hours straight decoding the signal. Didn't eat, didn't sleep. His eyes were bloodshot and wild by the time he stormed into Mason's quarters, holding a data slate like it was a live grenade. "It's not just a signal," he said. "It's a breadcrumb trail." To what? Kieran swallowed hard. To them. The Seraphim weren't gone. Of course they weren't. Mason had known it deep down, like a bruise you stop pressing on, but never forget. They'd cut the head off the snake. But snakes had nests. The signal was triangulating from orbit, not from a ship. From a relay chain, hidden fragments of Seraphim tech buried in old satellites, still clinging to protocols, still whispering across space. And now, something was answering back. Something new. They called it the Echo, because that's what it was. Not a fleet. Not yet. But a reply. Not from the Seraphim that attacked Earth. From the ones that never got the chance to. The ones out there. Waiting. Listening. Alara's fists clenched the moment she heard. "We were the test." Mason nodded. "And now they want the results." Haven called a summit. Leaders from other settlements, Pillar Ridge, Dustvale, Eden South, connected via secure link. They didn't argue. Not this time. The peace had been good, precious, but it was borrowed, and the lender was knocking. So they planned, not to hide, to reach out. Kieran had a theory. If we found the echo signal, we can send one. A pulse. Shortwave. Directed. Not a beacon of surrender. A message of warning. Alara was skeptical. "You think they'll care?" "No. But maybe, just maybe, we'll reach someone who does." Mason didn't say much during the debate. Just stood by the window, watching Ada help hang lanterns for the next solar harvest. He hated that the weight was falling on her shoulders now, but at the same time, he knew she could carry it. The launch site was in the Black Hollow, an old Seraphim relay they'd captured and converted, half buried in frost, half grown over in moss. Inside it, a core, still functional, still hungry. They sent a team, small, quiet, rangers, engineers. Ada insisted on going. Mason refused. She insisted again. I'm not a kid anymore, she said. I need to see. And in her eyes, he didn't see defiance. He saw duty. So he let her go. The journey took 3 days. Snow thick as memory. Wind that cut like old betrayal. They moved fast, but not fast enough. Something was already watching them. Not drones, not seraphim. Something in between. They called it the listener. They didn't know how long it had been active. Could have been months, years. A seraphim fragment that hadn't shut down after the war. It didn't speak, didn't attack. It recorded everything, every footstep, every word, every breath. Alara spotted it first, barely a shimmer in the trees. It moved like wind, looked like shadow, and then it vanished. By the time they reached the hollow, they were being followed. They all felt it. Ada most of all. She walked quieter than ever, hand on her rifle, mouth tight. When they entered the relay, the lights pulsed once. Faint, blue. Kieran powered up the core, and the walls shivered. The echo signal came in clearer now. Not just pulses, fragments of language. Not English, but not entirely alien either. Like someone or something was trying to meet them halfway. They're evolving again, Kieran whispered. They're adapting to us. Mason joined them at the hollow on day 5. Rex trotted beside him, armor dinted, eyes always scanning. He didn't ask for updates. He just looked at the snow, the tower, the cables, the sky. And then he said, we need to send it now. They'd written the message days earlier. Short, direct, a pulse of humanity. We are still here. We remember. We will not kneel. Simple, honest, unmistakable. They launched it. Ada pressed the button, and the signal shot into the dark. The sky didn't change. No immediate response. Just silence. And somewhere, behind them, a scream. The listener had called friends. They came in quiet, then fast. Flesh tech hybrids. Half machine, half something else. They weren't here to talk. They were here to erase. The fight was brutal. Not long. Just sharp. Like a blade you didn't see coming. 3 rangers died in the first 30 seconds. Alara went down in the second minute. Slashed across the ribs. Breath choking on blood. Kieran overloaded the relay core to buy them time. And Ada? Ada didn't hesitate. She ran, grabbed Alara, hauled her across ice slick with fire. Fired 3 perfect shots into the thing chasing them. Didn't blink, didn't miss. Mason covered the rear. Rex charged like a freight train wrapped in teeth. They made it back to the skiff, burning, bleeding, alive, but only barely. They didn't speak on the ride back, just breathed and listened to the silence. Back at Haven, the signal dish caught something. A response, not from Earth, from beyond. Short, encrypted, half corrupted, but clear. We heard you. And suddenly, the sky wasn't silent anymore. It was listening. There's a saying that fire can either destroy or forge. Sometimes it burns the world down. Sometimes it melts steel into something stronger. For humanity, the fire was never a choice. It was the only thing they'd ever really known. When the sky finally broke again, it wasn't a whisper. It was a roar. 1,000 miles away, where stars once blinked in peaceful silence, now flared a constellation of lights ships. Not graceful, not elegant. Ugly, jagged, desperate. The remnants of the seraphim. Haven felt it first. A tremor underfoot. A shiver in the static. The sky was calling. And this time, it wasn't a test. It was war. Mason stood on the highest tower, the cold wind biting through his worn coat. Rex sat quietly at his feet, eyes scanning the horizon like a soldier who knew the cost before the fight even began. Around them, the people of Haven moved with a calm born of fire and loss. They weren't afraid, not really, because this was their home, and they weren't going to watch it burn. Alara limped toward the command post, her face a map of old wounds and new scars. Her voice was steady, even as the walls shook from distant blasts. They're coming in waves. How long do we have? Not long. Kieran sat surrounded by humming machines and tangled wires, a mess of notes and screens lighting his tired face. His fingers flew over controls, relays, and encrypted signals. They're adapting faster than we thought, meaning they're learning our tactics, using our weapons against us. Ada stood beside him, face pale, but eyes burning. Then we need to be faster. And so the dance began. Not a graceful one. No slow steps or careful turns. This was a brutal fight. Grimy, relentless, and merciless. The first wave hit the outskirts of Haven just before dawn. Ships broke through clouds like shards of glass. Drones swarmed like locusts. Hybrid beasts tore through outposts, tearing flesh and metal alike. But the people of Haven were ready. They didn't retreat. They didn't hide. They fought with everything they had. Rex tore through the front line, teeth sinking into synthetic sinew, jaws snapping like steel traps. Alara moved like a ghost, her rifle singing death, every shot precise, every breath controlled. Ada fought like the fire she was named after, young, fierce, untamed, her blade carving through the enemy's ranks. Mason wasn't just a leader anymore. He was the heart, the pulse, the defiance wrapped in blood and scars. He rallied fighters, pulled survivors from rubble, and made impossible decisions without hesitation. Because in war, hesitation is death. The battle stretched through the day, through the night, a war without end, where every second was paid in sweat and blood. They lost people, friends, siblings, mothers, fathers, but they kept fighting, because giving up meant something worse than death. It meant extinction. At one point, the enemy breached the main gate. Chaos spilled like wildfire through the streets. Buildings exploded. People screamed. But in the thick of the fight, Mason found himself face to face with something impossible. A seraphim queen, towering, alien, a nightmarish silhouette etched in dark armor and glowing veins. Her voice wasn't a voice. It was a command. Her eyes locked on Mason, as if he were both prey and puzzle. She moved with deadly grace, but Mason held his ground. "You fought well," she said, voice crackling like electricity. "Why do you resist?" Mason didn't answer with words. He answered with a punch, a fierce, brutal blow that shattered the illusion of invincibility. The queen snarled, then laughed, not because she expected to win, because she admired the fight. It wasn't about survival anymore. It was about meaning, about sending a message to the stars. Mason raised his rifle and shouted, "We were meant to burn." The battle turned, fueled by fury, fueled by hope. The people of Haven surged forward. They weren't just fighting for their lives. They were fighting for everything. The queen fell. The enemy retreated. The sky cleared. But it wasn't the end. It was a beginning, because fire doesn't just consume. It forges. Weeks later, Mason sat on the edge of a rebuilt wall, watching the sun rise over a battered but unbeaten world. Alara and Ada were beside him. They didn't speak. They didn't need to, because sometimes silence holds more than words. Mason looked out and saw not ruins, not ghosts, but a future. "We were never meant to survive untouched. We were meant to burn," he said softly, "so we could rise." And rise they did. The stars still shone. The sky still waited. But humanity was ready, not just to face the dark, but to own it.